The Galactic Diplomacy Summit on Nexus Station was, without a doubt, the most awkward cocktail party in 17 solar systems. Picture this: a room filled with ambassadors from across the known universe, some with tentacles, some with exoskeletons, some who breathe methane for fun. And all of them dressed in what their species considered formal attire. For the Grakthar delegation, this meant coating themselves in ceremonial bioluminescent mucus. For the Zephyrians, it meant wearing exactly nothing, because apparently clothing is offensive in their culture. Go figure. What? And then there was Jake Miller, human ambassador to the Galactic Confederation, who stood at a measly 5'7" in his standard-issue diplomatic uniform. Earth had only joined the Galactic Confederation 3 years ago, and humans were still a novelty most alien species regarded with the same enthusiasm as finding mold on their food substitute packs. "Look at it," rumbled Ambassador Crux of the Taurian Empire, his 4 eyes narrowing as he gestured with one of his 3 upper appendages toward Jake. "So small and squishy. How did they ever achieve space travel without exiting their evolutionary larval stage?" His companion, a gelatinous mass named Diplomat Bubble of the Aquarian Alliance, rippled in what passed for laughter among her kind. "I heard they need to consume plant and animal matter directly through an opening in their face. Barbaric. And their skeletal structure is internal. Can you imagine? All those hard bits just inside? Waiting to poke through?" added Crux, shuddering so hard his ceremonial armor rattled. Jake pretended not to hear as he sipped his drink, a concoction the bartender had assured him was mostly non-toxic to oxygen breathers, and surveyed the room. That's the thing about being human at these events. Everyone assumed your hearing was as pathetic as your physical appearance. They never bothered to learn that humans had surprisingly decent auditory capabilities compared to many species. Across the reception hall, a Dravaki warrior 9 feet of muscle, scales and bad attitude was regaling a group with tales of conquest. Commander Zorn, if Jake remembered correctly from the briefing files. The Dravaki were one of the apex predator species of the Confederation, and they made sure everyone knew it. "And then I separated its head from its thorax with one swipe," Zorn concluded, making a slashing motion with his taloned hand. His audience dutifully rippled, buzzed, or vibrated with appropriate appreciation. Jake sighed and checked the time on his neural implant display. 3 more hours of this diplomatic mingling before he could reasonably excuse himself. He reached for a passing server drone to exchange his empty glass for a full one. "Ambassador Miller," came a gentle voice from behind him. Jake turned to find himself face to whatever counted as a face with Diplomat Zen of the Archivist Collective. The Archivists resembled nothing so much as semi-transparent jellyfish floating 3 feet off the ground, their translucent tentacles housing an intricate network of bioluminescent neural pathways. "Diplomat Zen," Jake bowed slightly. "A pleasure to see you again." "The pleasure continues to be mutual," Zen pulsed faintly blue, a sign of friendly intent. "I observe that you are, as usual, enduring rather than enjoying this gathering." Jake smiled. "That obvious, huh? To those who know how to look." Zen's central mass contracted slightly. "I have always found humans fascinating. Your species possesses qualities that others find difficult to quantify." "Is that a compliment wrapped in scientist speak?" "Because I'll take it." Jake's smile grew more genuine. Before Zen could respond, a commotion near the entrance caught everyone's attention. The massive doors to the reception hall slid open, and a hush fell over the crowd as Commander Drez of the Kruvian Empire entered, flanked by his personal guards. The Kruvians were the bullies of the galactic neighborhood, strong, technologically advanced, and with a cultural appreciation for dominance displays that made them insufferable at diplomatic functions. Commander Drez swept his gaze around the room until it landed on Jake. His 4 mandibles clicked in what might have been amusement. "Ah," he said loudly enough for the entire room to hear. "The human is here. How quaint." Jake felt every eye, ocular cluster, and sensory appendage in the room turned toward him. Most with curiosity, some with pity, a few with something that might have been concern. Because everyone in that room knew something that Commander Drez had apparently missed in his intelligence briefings, Jake Miller might have been the smallest diplomat in the room. But he was also the one ambassador that nobody, not even the mighty Kruvians, should ever consider touching. Jake maintained eye contact with Commander Drez as the Kruvian made his way across the reception hall. Around them, conversations died mid-sentence, creating an eerie quiet broken only by the soft hum of the station's environmental systems. "Human," Drez said, towering over Jake. The Kruvian stood nearly 8 feet tall, his exoskeleton a mottled green and brown that reflected the light in iridescent patterns. His forearms ended in hands with 3 fingers each, currently flexing in what Jake recognized as a display of dominance. "I don't believe we've been formally introduced." "Commander Drez," Jake replied evenly. "Your reputation precedes you." "As does yours, apparently." Drez gestured around the room with one of his lower arms. "Though I confess I find myself perplexed. The way these dignitaries are watching us, one might think you pose some kind of threat." A ripple of uncomfortable movement passed through the crowd. Diplomat Zen drifted subtly backward, creating distance. Jake took another sip of his drink. "You know what they say about humans, Commander? We're full of surprises." "Yes, the surprise of how quickly you die when exposed to vacuum," Drez laughed, a harsh clicking sound that his translator rendered in approximated standard. "Or how easily your bones break under pressure." Jake smiled thinly. "Those are indeed facts about human physiology. Gold star for your research team." 5 years ago, when humans first made contact with the Galactic Confederation, nobody had taken them seriously either. Jake remembered the footage that had been shown in every history class since then. The first alien ship, a Moravian research vessel, landing in the middle of Central Park. Humanity holding its collective breath as the first extraterrestrial stepped onto Earth's soil. And then Ambassador Torque of the Moravians looking down at the human delegation and asking, with genuine confusion, if the adults would be joining the conversation soon. It took 3 more meetings before the aliens realized that, yes, humans really were that small, fragile, and disappointingly devoid of natural weapons. No claws, no armor, not even decent teeth. Just soft, easily punctured skin over a brittle calcium frame. The collective assessment from the galactic community had been, to put it mildly, underwhelming. "I've studied your species' first contact logs," Drez continued, circling Jake slowly. "The Moravians classified humans as a non-threat species, barely above the security classification of a domesticated companion animal." "Did they?" Jake raised an eyebrow. "Interesting. You should ask Torque how that assessment worked out for him sometime." A few gasps echoed around the room. Ambassador Torque's reassignment after the Earth mission was something nobody discussed in polite company. Drez's antennae twitched in irritation. "Your insolence is noted, human. Perhaps you rely too heavily on your species' protected status as newcomers to the Confederation." From the corner of his eye, Jake could see other diplomats exchanging nervous glances. Diplomat Zen had drifted even further away, pulsing in concerned yellow patterns. Across the room, the bartender, a 6-armed Ventraxian with a keen sense for trouble, was discreetly activating the security alert button under the counter. "Commander," came a melodious voice, cutting through the tension. "How delightful that you could join us." Jake glanced over to see Ambassador Lyra of the Kaelesti approaching. The Kaelesti were one of the oldest species in the Confederation, humanoid in general shape but with skin that resembled polished opal, shifting colors with their moods and thoughts. Currently, Lyra's skin was pulsing with calm blues and diplomatic purples. "Ambassador Lyra," Drez acknowledged with the barest incline of his head. "I was just becoming acquainted with the human specimen." "Ambassador Miller," Lyra corrected gently, moving to stand beside Jake. Though she was nearly 7 feet tall, there was something protective in how she positioned herself, one of our most valued newer members of the diplomatic corps. Dres clicked his mandibles dismissively. Yes, the Earthers and their unique perspective. I've read the Council's justification for fast-tracking their membership. Then you're well informed, Lyra smiled, her skin briefly flashing a warning red before returning to diplomatic purple, and aware of Ambassador Miller's particular qualifications. Something flickered in Dres's compound eyes, a moment of uncertainty quickly masked by arrogance. I am aware of the human's official file. I am also aware that much of it is exaggerated propaganda designed to give this species unearned standing. Jake watched this exchange with practiced calm, but his mind was racing. The Kruvians had been notably absent from the official welcome ceremonies when Earth joined the Confederation 3 years ago. They'd been dealing with an internal rebellion on one of their colony worlds, a rebellion that had mysteriously ended just as suddenly as it had begun. Which meant Dres hadn't been there to witness firsthand what had happened when the Aurelian delegation had decided to test the new human ambassador during the welcome banquet. Commander, Jake said, deliberately relaxing his posture, perhaps we could discuss your concerns about Earth's position in the Confederation over dinner sometime? I'd be happy to clarify any misconceptions. Dres's upper right hand made a dismissive gesture. I do not break bread with lesser species human. Especially not ones whose greatest achievement seems to be an inflated reputation. From somewhere in the crowd, Jake heard a soft voice mutter, "Oh no, he didn't." The universal translator struggled with the idiom, rendering it as negative. He did not perform this action, but the sentiment was clear enough. Lyra's skin had shifted to alarmed oranges and reds. Commander Dres, perhaps. No, it's fine, Jake interrupted smoothly. The commander is entitled to his opinion, and opinions can always be adjusted when new information comes to light. Dres leaned down, his face coming uncomfortably close to Jake's. Is that a threat? Small one? Jake smiled, the kind of smile that didn't reach his eyes. Not at all, Commander. Just an observation about the educational process. We humans are big believers in learning opportunities. Then here is a lesson for you. Dres straightened to his full height, towering over Jake. The Kruvian Empire does not recognize Earth's claim to 3 of its outer colony worlds. Those territories fall within our expansion zone, as mapped centuries before your kind learned to leave your atmosphere. The room fell into shocked silence. This wasn't just rudeness anymore, this was a diplomatic challenge that bordered on a declaration of hostile intent. Jake's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes did a cold calculation, replacing the diplomatic patience. Around them, several ambassadors began discreetly moving toward the exits. Is that so? Jake said quietly. Well, Commander, I believe that brings us to the portion of the evening where things get interesting. Commander Dres's mandibles clicked rapidly, the Kruvian equivalent of a derisive snort. Interesting. Perhaps to those who enjoy watching the weak posture as though they have strength. The tension in the room had reached levels typically reserved for pre-war treaty negotiations. Several security drones had positioned themselves strategically around the perimeter, their weapon systems in standby mode. You know what I find fascinating about your species, Commander? Jake set his drink down on a passing server drone's tray. You evolved as ambush predators on a high-gravity world, which gave you impressive physical strength and natural armor. Your society developed around dominance hierarchies, where the strong command and the weak serve. Jake began to walk in a small circle around Dres, a move that clearly irritated the Kruvian, who had to keep turning to maintain eye contact. And because of that evolutionary history, Jake continued, you cannot fathom a species achieving spaceflight without the same attributes. It's literally beyond your comprehension that intelligence alone could compensate for physical weakness. A muscle or whatever passed for one under that exoskeleton twitched beneath Dres's right eye. Your species' over-reliance on technology masks your fundamental inferiority, nothing more. Maybe, Jake shrugged. Or maybe there's something about humans you haven't figured out yet. something that made the Confederation welcome us with open arms or tentacles or pseudopods, or whatever appendages were available. Somewhere in the crowd, someone snickered. Drez's antennae flattened against his head, a sign of growing anger. 3 weeks ago, Drez said, his voice dropping to a dangerous pitch, a human mining operation established itself on Proxima Centauri TI. That planet falls within the Kruvian expansion zone. Funny thing about expansion zones, Jake replied. They only count if you actually expand into them. Proxima Centauri I had no Kruvian presence when our miners arrived. It was claimed by right of first discovery by the Emperor himself. In 2157 by your calendar. And in the 70 years since then, you've done what with it exactly? Posted a flag? Because when our survey teams arrived, all they found was uninhabited real estate. Drez's upper hands clenched into fists. You test my patience, human. And you test interstellar law, Commander. The Confederation's Treaty of Expansion clearly states that claimed worlds must show signs of development within 50 standard years, or they return to unclaimed status. Jake smiled. We did our homework. A low murmur rippled through the watching crowd. The human was right, and everyone knew it. The Kruvians had been claiming territories for centuries without developing them, simply to prevent other species from using the resources. Homework. Drez spat the word like a curse. You speak of galactic affairs as though they were a school assignment. Well, when you're the new kid in class, you tend to study harder, Jake replied. That's when Drez made his critical mistake. Frustrated by the human's con logic and the crowd's shifting sympathy, he reached out with one of his lower arms and poked Jake in the chest with a clawed finger. You will withdraw your mining operation within 3 cycles or... He never finished the sentence. The moment his claw made contact with Jake's chest, 3 things happened in rapid succession. First, Jake moved far faster than anyone expected a human could move, catching Drez's extended arm at the joint. Second, a series of alarmed chirps, whistles, and electromagnetic pulses erupted from the watching diplomats, along with the galactic equivalent of OH, from those who recognized what Drez had just done. And third, the security drones instantly powered down their weapons systems and retreated to the walls, as though they wanted nothing to do with what was about to happen. Commander Drez, Jake said, his voice eerily calm despite the grip he maintained on the Kruvian's arm. You seem to have missed an important briefing about diplomatic protocols when dealing with humans. Drez tried to pull his arm back, only to find that despite the human's smaller stature, he couldn't break free. Confusion flashed across his compound eyes. Release me at once. In a moment, Jake smiled. First, let me explain where you went wrong. You see, when Earth joined the Confederation, we insisted on one unusual diplomatic provision. It's actually quite famous now. They call it the Miller Protocol, though I find that a bit embarrassing personally. From the crowd, Ambassador Lyra's melodious voice added, Section 7, Paragraph 12 of the Earth Admission Treaty, physical contact with human diplomatic personnel without prior consent is considered an act of aggression and voids all normal diplomatic protections. Jake nodded. Exactly. Thank you, Ambassador. He turned his attention back to the increasingly uncomfortable Drez. Which means, Commander, that the moment you poked me, you transferred our interaction from the realm of protected diplomatic exchange to the, let's call it a more direct form of negotiation. Drez's other 3 arms began to move, clearly preparing to strike. But before they could, Jake did something that made everyone in the room flinch. He applied the slightest pressure to the joint he was holding, producing a distinct creaking sound from Drez's exoskeleton. The Kruvian froze, his eyes widening in a display of universal shock. How are you? Drez began. Doing this? Jake finished for him. That's the question everyone asks. Would you like to know the answer, Commander? What? Drez didn't respond, but his antennae were now flat against his skull in a display of submission that the proud Kruvian had likely never shown to any being in his adult life. Humans. May. Jake explained conversationally, as though he weren't holding a creature twice his size in a joint lock, evolved on a death world. Oh, we don't call it that, we call it Earth. And we think it's quite lovely. But by galactic standards, our home planet tried to kill us every single day of our evolution. Jake relaxed his grip just enough to allow Drez to stand more comfortably, but maintained control of the joint. We survived predators with teeth longer than your arms. We endured ice ages and volcanic winters. We thrived in deserts that would desiccate your species in hours and oceans that would crush your exoskeleton like an eggshell. Our microbes are so aggressive that half the species in this room would die from a simple handshake with me if not for the biofilters in this station's air system. A small crowd had formed a circle around them now, with ambassadors and aides watching in fascinated horror. But most importantly, Jake continued, we survived each other. While your species was still figuring out how to make fire, humans were already developing combat techniques specifically designed to kill other humans. We've had thousands of years to perfect the art of turning our evolutionary weaknesses into strengths. With a swift, controlled movement that drew gasps from the crowd, Jake released Drez's arm and stepped back, assuming a relaxed stance. So here's the challenge I'm issuing. Commander Drez of the Kruvian Empire, go back to your superiors and tell them what happened here tonight. Tell them that Earth stands by its claim to Proxima Centauri E and any other unclaimed world we choose to develop. And tell them. Yeah. Jake's voice dropped to a quieter tone that somehow carried even more weight, that the next time they send someone to intimidate a human diplomat, they should choose someone they don't mind losing. For a long moment, Drez stared at Jake, his compound eyes unreadable. Then, with a stiff formality that barely masked his humiliation, he bowed his head slightly. This matter is not concluded, Ambassador Miller. No, Jake agreed. But the manner in which it continues is now entirely up to you and your empire. As Drez turned and stalked toward the exit, his guards scrambling to keep up, the reception hall erupted into a buzz of excited conversation. Species that had been giving humans a wide berth since their arrival in galactic society were suddenly finding reasons to edge closer to Jake. Ambassador Lyra glided to Jake's side, her skin now pulsing with impressed blues and golds. Well handled, Ambassador. Though perhaps a bit more dramatic than the Council might have preferred. Jake shrugged. The Kruvians only respect strength, Ambassador. Anything less, and we'd be fighting border skirmishes within a month. True enough, Lyra conceded, though I suspect there's more to your capabilities than you've revealed tonight. Jake's smile was enigmatic. There usually is. 2 hours after the confrontation with Drez, Jake found himself in one of Nexus Station's observation lounges, nursing a drink that actually was non-toxic to humans. The vast window before him offered a spectacular view of the swirling nebula that surrounded the station, brilliant purples and blues against the backdrop of space. May I join you? Came a familiar voice. Jake turned to see Diplomat Zen of the Archivist Collective hovering nearby, their translucent body gently pulsing with curious yellows and interested greens. Please, Jake gestured to the space beside him. Though I'm not sure how comfortable these human-designed chairs are for someone without, well, a posterior. Zen's body rippled in what Jake had come to recognize as their version of laughter. We archivists do not require physical comfort in the same way solid species do. Our bodies are primarily energy matrices contained within semi-permeable membranes. But right, Jake nodded. I knew that. What you did tonight, Zen began, changing the subject with characteristic archivist directness, has already spread throughout the station's communication networks. Commander Drez's humiliation is being discussed in 17 different languages across 12 decks. That wasn't my intention, Jake sighed. Well, not entirely. Intention is irrelevant to outcome, Zen observed philosophically. Their central core brightened slightly. What interests me is the disconnect between the official records of human capabilities and the evidence presented by your own actions. Jake took a sip of his drink. You mean why a supposedly non-threat species could immobilize a Kruvian warrior with one hand? Precisely. Jake was silent for a moment, watching the nebula's slow dance outside the window. Have you ever heard of a man named Jack Churchill, diplomat gen? I have not. Me. He was a human soldier during one of our global conflicts about 500 years ago. While everyone else was using firearms and explosives, Churchill went into battle with a longbow, a sword, and bagpipes. This seems counterproductive to survival, Sen observed. You'd think so, Jake smiled. But he survived the entire war, captured 42 enemy soldiers in one night using just his sword, and when asked why he carried a blade in modern warfare, he said, "Any officer who goes into action without his sword is improperly dressed." Zen's body pulsed with confusion. I fail to see the relevance. The relevance is that humans, throughout our history, have never approached problems the way other species expect us to. Jake turned to face the archivist fully. When we first joined the Confederation, we were classified as a non-threat species because, by all objective measures, we are physically inferior to most spacefaring races. This is factually accurate, Zen agreed. But what the initial assessment missed was context. Yes, a Kruvian is stronger than a human. A Dravaki has natural weapons we lack. A Zephyrian can survive in environments that would kill us instantly. But what those evaluations failed to account for was how humans compensate. Jake raised his hand, examining it in the nebula's ethereal light. Take this encounter with Drez. He assumed his superior strength meant he had the advantage in any physical confrontation. What he didn't know was that I spent 15 years studying Kwai Jin martial arts before joining the diplomatic corps. I specifically trained to overcome larger, stronger opponents by using their own mass and momentum against them. Zen drifted closer, clearly fascinated. This was not in your official file. No, Jake agreed. It wasn't. An intentional omission? Let's call it a strategic ambiguity. Jake's expression grew more serious. 3 years ago, when Earth first joined the Confederation, we faced an incident during the welcome ceremonies. Sen's body flickered with recognition. The Aurelian test. Jake nodded grimly. That's what they call it now. At the time, it was just a nightmare scenario. The Aurelian delegation, led by High Marshal Kiev, decided to evaluate human capabilities firsthand by attacking our diplomatic team during the banquet. I have reviewed the restricted footage, Sen admitted. It was unexpected. That's one word for it. Jake's expression darkened at the memory. 7 Aurelian elite guards against 3 human diplomats. Everyone expected a massacre. What they got instead was a demonstration of why humans survived on our death world long enough to reach the stars. The incident had become legendary in Confederation circles. 3 humans, none with obvious weapons or armor, had neutralized 7 Aurelian warriors in less than 40 seconds. The footage had been classified immediately afterward, but rumors spread. The Aurelians had withdrawn from the Confederation the following day, and no one had heard from them since. What was not evident from the recording, Zen said carefully, was how 3 physically inferior beings accomplished this feat. Jake's smile held no humor. That's the thing about humans, Diplomat Zen. We look soft, but we've spent our entire evolutionary history learning to be dangerous without looking dangerous. Our ancestors weren't the strongest or fastest or best armored animals on our planet, so we had to become the most adaptable, the most innovative, and when necessary, the most ruthless. He gestured toward the stars visible beyond the nebula. Out there, species evolved with natural advantages: claws, armor, venom, incredible strength. They never needed to develop alternatives. But humans? We had to get creative. And this creativity extends to combat techniques. Among other things, Jake nodded. Every human diplomatic representative undergoes extensive combat training before receiving an off-world assignment. Some, like me, are recruited specifically for our pre-existing skills. A diplomat who is also a warrior, Sen pulsed thoughtfully. This duality would be considered contradictory in many cultures. In human culture, it's just practical. Jake shrugged. We hoped we'd never need to demonstrate these capabilities again after the Aurelian incident. The Council assured us that word had spread that no species would make the same mistake twice. And yet Commander Drez did not heed these warnings. The Kruvians have always believed themselves exceptional, Jake said dryly. Their mistake was assuming we aren't. A soft chime from the lounge entrance announced another visitor. Both Jake and Jen turned to see Ambassador Lyra entering, her opalescent skin now glowing with calmer hues. Ambassador Miller, she greeted him warmly. I hoped I might find you here. The Council has convened an emergency session regarding tonight's incident. Jake suppressed a groan. Let me guess. They're not thrilled about a human diplomat putting a Kruvian commander in a joint lock in the middle of a diplomatic reception? On the contrary, Lyra's skin flashed briefly with amused pinks. They wish to commend you for your restraint. Restraint? Jake blinked in surprise. Indeed. The Kruvians have lodged a formal protest, of course, but the Council has already dismissed it on the grounds that Drez violated the Miller Protocol. Lyra moved closer, her voice dropping. However, there is another matter we must discuss. The Kruvian Empire has mobilized their third fleet along the border near Proxima Centauri. Jake felt his blood run cold. Already? That was fast. The Kruvians do not appreciate being humiliated, Lyra said grimly. Especially not by a species they consider inferior. Ben's body pulsed with alarmed oranges. This suggests a military response is imminent. Which brings me to why I sought you out, Lyra continued. The Council requests your presence at the emergency session. Not as Earth's ambassador, but as... As what? Jake asked when she hesitated. Lyra's skin shifted to a formal, deep blue. As the Confederation's official advisor on human military capabilities and response protocols. Jake stared at her for a long moment. They want me to explain what will happen if the Kruvians attack Earth, don't they? Yes, Lyra admitted. They do. Jake turned back to the window, watching the swirling nebula gases. In their chaotic patterns, he was reminded of the unpredictability of human history, how quickly peace could turn to war, and how devastating humans could be when pushed into conflict. Tell them I'll be there, he said quietly. And tell them to prepare for a very uncomfortable conversation. The Confederation Council chamber was designed to accommodate representatives of over 300 different species, which made it both architecturally impressive and profoundly bizarre. Seating ranged from standard chairs to aquatic tanks, anti-gravity platforms, and even a section filled with carefully regulated methane gas for species that would explode on contact with oxygen. Jake stood at the central podium, surrounded on all sides by tiered seating filled with the most powerful political entities in the known galaxy. At a separate podium across the chamber stood Commander Drez, flanked by 2 Kruvian officials in full military regalia. This emergency session of the Galactic Confederation Council is now in progress, announced the council chair, an ancient Vermidian whose species communicated through colored bioluminescent patterns that rippled across their segmented body. A translator drone hovered nearby, converting the light signals into audible speech. The council recognizes the human representative, Ambassador Jake Miller. Jake nodded respectfully. Honorable Chair, esteemed council members, I appreciate the opportunity to address this assembly regarding the current situation with the Kruvian Empire. Before the human speaks, interrupted Drez, his mandibles clicking agitatedly, the Kruvian Empire wishes to formally protest its inclusion in these proceedings. The human diplomatic corps has demonstrated aggressive and provocative behavior unbefitting of Confederation membership. A series of disapproving murmurs rippled through the chamber. The chair's body flashed a stern pattern of red and orange. Commander Dres, you were not recognized by the chair. However, since you have spoken, let the record show that it was you who initiated physical contact with Ambassador Miller, thereby triggering the Miller Protocol which your delegation signed and ratified 3 years ago. Dres's antennae flattened against his head. The Empire signed no such. Your predecessor, General Vrak, signed on behalf of the Kruvian Empire, the chair interrupted, flashing impatient yellow patterns. The document bears the Imperial seal. Unless you are suggesting that the Empire's word is not binding across administrations? That silenced Dres immediately. Nothing was more important to Kruvians than their reputation for keeping their word once given. Even questioning it would be politically suicidal back home. Now then, the chair continued, Ambassador Miller, please proceed with your assessment of the current situation. Jake took a deep breath. Honorable Council, information has reached us that the Kruvian Third Fleet has been mobilized and is currently positioning itself along the border near Earth's Proxima Centauri colony. We believe this represents a direct military threat to Confederation territory and Earth citizens. A routine training exercise, Dres countered immediately. Nothing more. With live ammunition and invasion protocols, Jake raised an eyebrow. Our intelligence suggests otherwise. The chamber erupted in concerned chatter. The chair flashed a brilliant white pattern that called for silence. Ambassador Miller, the chair's translator drone intoned, the Council has asked you here not only as Earth's representative but as an expert on human military response capabilities. Should the Kruvian fleet take hostile action, how would Earth respond? This was the moment Jake had been dreading, the moment when he would have to explain to the assembled representatives of hundreds of peaceful worlds just what humanity was capable of when threatened. With respect, Honorable Chair, I'd prefer to explore diplomatic solutions first. Naturally, the chair agreed. However, the Council requires a full understanding of potential scenarios to make informed decisions. Please answer the question. Jake looked around the chamber, meeting the eyes, eye stalks, sensory clusters, and visual receptors of dozens of species. Many had initially dismissed humans as harmless curiosities. After tonight, that perception would change forever. Very well. Jake straightened his shoulders. In the event of a Kruvian attack on any Earth colony, our response would be immediate, proportional, and final. Elaborate, prompted the chair. Earth maintains a defense fleet that we have intentionally kept minimal and visible presence in keeping with our desire to appear non-threatening to our new galactic neighbors. Jake's voice remained calm, but carried throughout the chamber. What is not widely known is that we also maintain a rapid response force specifically designed to counter threats from technologically superior species. Dres made a dismissive gesture. Bluffs and exaggerations. Your species barely mastered faster than light travel a century ago. That's correct, Jake nodded. And in that century we've developed technologies specifically designed to overcome our physical limitations. He turned back to address the full council. The Kruvian fleet relies on crystalline matrix quantum computers for navigation and weapons targeting. Our first response would be a targeted EMP pulse specifically calibrated to disrupt those systems without affecting other technology. Dres's mandibles clicked rapidly, a sign of agitation. Impossible. Our systems are shielded against such primitive attacks. They're shielded against known attack vectors, Jake corrected. But human scientists specialize in finding weaknesses others overlook. Did you know, for instance, that your crystalline matrices have a resonant frequency that, when matched precisely, can induce cascade failures across entire systems? A stunned silence fell over the chamber. Several council members exchanged alarmed glances. Furthermore, Jake continued, Human military doctrine does not follow conventional galactic norms. While most species focus on overwhelming force or technological superiority, humans specialize in asymmetric warfare, unconventional tactics, and psychological operations. Psychological operations? A Merovian council member questioned, their fur bristling in confusion. Yes, Jake explained. For example, rather than attacking the entirety of an enemy fleet, we might target only the flagship but do so with such decisive precision that it demoralizes the remaining forces. Drez's compound eyes narrowed. These are the empty threats of a species trying to appear more dangerous than it is. Jake smiled, that same cold smile that had unnerved Drez earlier. Commander, have you ever heard of the human concept of a nuclear deterrent? The translator drone hesitated for a moment, as if searching for the correct translation, before relaying the term. Several gasps echoed through the chamber. You cannot be suggesting, began an elderly Kalesti representative. Before the Confederation contacted us. Jake interrupted smoothly. Humanity spent centuries pointing planet-killing weapons at each other. We never used them because we understood mutually assured destruction. When we joined the Confederation, we agreed to dismantle those weapons as a sign of good faith. Jake paused, letting his words sink in. What we didn't mention was that we kept the knowledge of how to build them. And we've since developed versions that are considerably more elegant. The council chamber erupted into alarmed chatter. The chair flashed a pattern of bright purple and blue that gradually restored order. Ambassador Miller, the chair's translator, intoned, "Are you threatening the use of prohibited planet-killing technology?" Absolutely not, Jake shook his head firmly. I'm explaining human defensive capabilities in response to a direct question. Earth has never and will never initiate hostile action against another species. But we will defend ourselves with absolute commitment if attacked. Bluffs and deception, Drez snarled. The Kruvian Empire has faced threats from far more advanced species than yours. Jake turned to face Drez directly. Commander, your intelligence on human capabilities is fundamentally flawed. Did you know that, during our own global conflicts, individual human soldiers have been known to hold off hundreds of enemy combatants? That we've developed fighting techniques specifically designed to use an opponent's strength against them? That human special forces train to operate while sleep-deprived, starving and injured, just to understand their limits? Physical prowess means nothing against our technology, Drez countered. You're right, Jake nodded, surprising everyone. Which is why we don't rely on physical prowess alone. We combine it with innovation, adaptability, and a particular trait that most galactic species find difficult to comprehend. And what trait is that? Asked an intrigued Archivist Council member. Controlled insanity, Jake said simply. Humans are willing to attempt strategies that any rational species would dismiss as suicidal. Throughout our history, we've prevailed not because we were stronger or better armed, but because we were willing to take risks that seemed unthinkable to our opponents. To demonstrate his point, Jake pulled a small object from his pocket, a simple metal lighter. With a flick of his thumb, he produced a flame. This is fire, he said unnecessarily, as every species present was familiar with the concept. One of humanity's first technological achievements. Most species discovered fire and used it for warmth and cooking. Do you know what humans did with it? Jake extinguished the flame and returned the lighter to his pocket. We weaponized it. Then we weaponized everything else we could find. Not because we're inherently violent, but because our survival demanded it. We're not the strongest species, or the fastest, or the most technologically advanced. But we are, without question, the most creative when it comes to turning disadvantages into advantages. A heavy silence settled over the chamber. Even Drez seemed momentarily at a loss for words. Finally, the chair's body flashed a complex pattern that the translator rendered as, "The Council acknowledges Earth's defensive position." Commander Dres, what say you to these revelations? Dres's mandibles worked silently for a moment before he spoke. The Kruvian Empire does not respond to threats. If the humans believe they can intimidate us with tales of their supposed capabilities, they are gravely mistaken. Not threats, Commander, Jake corrected. Just facts. And here's one more fact for you to consider. In the 3 years since Earth joined the Confederation, we've established diplomatic and trade relations with 87% of member species. We've shared medical technology that's increased quality of life across 17 systems. We've provided cultural exchanges that have enriched countless worlds. Jake's voice softened slightly. We don't want enemies, Commander. We want partners. Even with the Kruvian Empire. Something shifted in Dres's posture, almost imperceptible, but Jake caught it. The slightest relaxation of tension, the barest lowering of his aggressive stance. What exactly are you proposing? Dres asked cautiously. A joint development initiative, Jake replied without hesitation. Proxima Centauri A has resources valuable to both our species. Rather than fighting over it, we establish a cooperative mining operation. Earth provides the labor force and technical expertise. The Kruvian Empire provides security and transportation infrastructure. We share the profits equally. Dres's antennae twitched in what might have been surprise. And what guarantee would we have that humans wouldn't simply claim all the resources once operations were established? The same guarantee we'd have that Kruvians wouldn't do the same, Jake countered. Mutual interest and oversight from the Confederation. He paused, then added, plus the knowledge of what would happen if either side betrayed the agreement. For what seemed like an eternity, Dres stared at Jake across the council chamber. Jake kept his expression neutral, but maintained unwavering eye contact, a sign of respect in Kruvian culture. Finally, Dres straightened to his full height. The Kruvian Empire is willing to consider this proposal, provided all details are negotiated formally and with proper recognition of our historical claim to the region. A collective sigh of relief seemed to pass through the assembled representatives. The Council recognizes and appreciates this willingness to pursue a diplomatic solution, the chair's translator announced. A formal negotiation session will be scheduled. In the meantime, the Kruvian Empire is requested to withdraw its fleet from the border region as a show of good faith. Dres's mandibles clicked once. It will be done. Then this emergency session is concluded. The chair flashed a pattern of calm blue and green. As the representatives began to disperse, Jake found himself approached by Dres, who had crossed the chamber with surprising speed. Ambassador Miller, the Kruvian said, his voice low enough that only Jake could hear him. A question, if you would. Of course. Earlier today, in the reception hall, you could have broken my arm, couldn't you? Jake met the Kruvian's gaze steadily. Yes. May just say. Why didn't you? Because, Jake replied simply, contrary to what you might believe about humans, we don't enjoy hurting others, even when we could. Dres studied him for a long moment, then nodded once, a gesture of respect that carried significant weight in Kruvian culture. Perhaps, he said quietly, there is more to learn about humans than our intelligence reports suggest. There usually is, Jake replied. About all species. As Dres turned to leave, Jake allowed himself a small, genuine smile. Sometimes the most effective showdown wasn't won with weapons or threats, but with the simple willingness to be both dangerous when necessary and reasonable when possible, a balance that humans had been perfecting for millennia. 3 weeks after the confrontation in the council chamber, Jake found himself back at the same bar where it had all started. The Galactic Diplomacy Summit was winding down, with most delegations preparing to return to their homeworlds. The atmosphere was notably different, now more relaxed, more collegial, and with significantly fewer species avoiding the human section. Ambassador Miller, rumbled a familiar voice. Jake turned to see Ambassador Crux of the Taurian Empire approaching, all four of his eyes fixed on Jake with what appeared to be newfound respect. "May I join you?" "Please," Jake gestured to the empty seat beside him. "And just Jake is fine when we're off duty." Crux settled his massive frame onto the reinforced chair. "I must confess, I have been reevaluating my assessment of your species." "Is that so?" Jake took a sip of his drink, still the same mostly non-toxic concoction he'd been nursing since his arrival. "Indeed." Crux shifted uncomfortably. "My earlier comments about humans being in a larval stage were uninformed." Jake suppressed a smile. "No offense taken, Ambassador. First impressions can be deceiving, particularly when the species in question has deliberately cultivated a misleading first impression," came another voice. Diplomat Bubble of the Aquarian Alliance oozed her way toward their table, her gelatinous form rippling with what Jake now recognized as amused patterns. "I wouldn't say misleading," Jake protested mildly. "Just incomplete." "The agreement signed today between Earth and the Kruvian Empire," Bubble continued, settling her form into a specialized containment chair, "has caused quite a stir in diplomatic circles." "A joint development initiative on a contested world?" Unprecedented. Word had spread quickly about the deal Jake had negotiated with Commander Drez. The formal signing ceremony earlier that day had been attended by representatives from over 50 species, all curious to witness this unexpected alliance between the galaxy's newest member and one of its most aggressive established powers. "Sometimes the best solution isn't about who has the stronger claim," Jake replied, "but about finding mutual benefit." "A very human perspective," observed Crux. "Most species would have insisted on either full ownership or nothing." "That's the thing about evolving on a world with limited resources," Jake shrugged. "You either learn to share or you destroy each other fighting over scraps." The bar had grown busier as more delegates arrived for end-of-summit celebrations. Jake noticed how many of them now acknowledged him with nods, gestures, or their species equivalent of respectful greetings, a marked change from the indifference or disdain he'd faced just weeks earlier. "Ambassador Miller," called a melodious voice. Jake turned to see Ambassador Lyra approaching, her opalescent skin glowing with pleased purples and satisfied blues. "Or should I say, the hero of the summit?" Jake winced. "Please don't call me that." "Why not? It's what they're all saying." Lyra gestured around the room. "The human who faced down the Kruvian Empire and turned a potential war into a profitable partnership. The Council is extremely pleased." "I was just doing my job," Jake insisted. With uncharacteristic effectiveness, added Diplomat Zen, who had drifted over to join their growing circle. The archivist's body pulsed with scholarly interest. "Our collective has been documenting the shift in interspecies attitudes toward humans since the incident. The data is fascinating." "How so?" Jake asked, genuinely curious. "Prior to your confrontation with Commander Drez, humans were categorized as physically non-threatening but potentially useful for creative problem-solving by 73% of Confederation species. Zen's tendrils rippled with data patterns. Current assessments now include descriptors such as deceptively dangerous, unpredictably effective, and my personal favorite, soft exterior concealing tactical brilliance." Jake couldn't help but laugh. "We've been upgraded from mostly harmless to approach with caution, is that it?" "Essentially," Zen confirmed. From across the bar, Jake noticed Commander Drez entering with his entourage. The Kruvian spotted Jake immediately and, after a moment's hesitation, altered his course to approach their table. The conversations around them dimmed as many watched with interest. The last time these two had been in a room together, it had nearly started an interstellar incident. "Ambassador Miller," Drez greeted formally, his mandibles clicking in a respectful pattern. "Commander Drez," Jake nodded. "Congratulations on the agreement. I believe both our worlds will benefit greatly." "As do I." Drez's posture was stiffer than normal, even for a Kruvian, suggesting he was uncomfortable but determined. The Imperial Council has revised our strategic assessment of Earth and its representatives. Oh? Jake kept his expression neutral. Yes, you are now classified as a priority diplomatic partner rather than a territorial expansion opportunity. The aliens at Jake's table exchanged shocked glances. For the Kruvians to openly admit reclassifying another species was unprecedented. I'm honored, Jake said sincerely, and I look forward to a productive relationship between our peoples. Drez hesitated, then added, there is also a personal notation in your file now. Really? What does it say? Drez's mandibles clicked once in what might have been embarrassment. It says, despite small stature, do not physically engage. Approach with diplomatic respect. The table fell silent for a moment before Jake smiled. Well, that's progress. A month ago, I wasn't even worth a file entry. Indeed. Drez inclined his head slightly. I must rejoin my delegation now, but I wish to convey this information personally. As the Kruvian commander walked away, Ambassador Lyra leaned in. Do you realize what just happened? The Kruvians never admit to reclassifying a species. It's practically an acknowledgement of equal standing. All because you were willing to break his arm but chose not to, Crux added with something like admiration in his four-eyed gaze. Jake shook his head. No, all because we found common ground despite our differences. That's the real strength humans bring to the Confederation, not our hidden combat skills or unconventional problem-solving. It's our willingness to see potential allies where others might only see competitors. Diplomat Jen pulsed thoughtfully. An interesting perspective. Perhaps this explains why, despite your species' obvious physical limitations, you have achieved what others with far greater natural advantages could not. And what's that? Jake asked. Respect, Zen replied simply. Not born of fear, but of recognition. As the evening continued, Jake found himself at the center of a growing gathering of diplomats from across the galaxy, species that would never have given him a second glance before. They asked questions about Earth, about human culture, about what other surprises his species might have in store. He answered with good humor and honesty, but kept certain details vague. After all, though part of humanity's newfound standing in the galactic community came from the mystery, they now represented the smallest beings in the room who somehow commanded the greatest caution. Later that night, as the celebrations wound down, Jake found himself alone at the observation window, watching the stars. Ambassador Lyra joined him, her skin glowing softly in the dimmed lighting. Penny, for your thoughts? She asked, having picked up the human phrase during their many diplomatic sessions. I was just thinking about first impressions, Jake replied. When humans first joined the Confederation, everyone saw us as weak, fragile creatures who somehow stumbled into space travel. And now? Now they're not quite sure what to make of us, Jake smiled. Which is exactly where we want to be. Strategic ambiguity, Lyra observed. A very human approach. We've learned throughout our history that sometimes the most effective deterrent isn't visible strength, but the uncertainty of what you might be capable of. Jake turned to face her. Every species has its advantages. Kruvians have their strength, archivists have their knowledge, your people have your longevity and wisdom. Humans? We have adaptability and just enough unpredictability to keep everyone guessing. And a remarkably effective diplomatic corps, Lyra added with a ripple of amused colors across her skin.